I succeeded on my own, but my brother thinks I'm his responsibility and is determined to claim my wealth and $5 million as family support. And then I still remember the feeling of walking out of that final investor meeting, my head spinning, trying to comprehend what had just happened. A deal worth $20 million. $20 million. For a guy like me, who grew up scraping by and watching my parents count every cent. It felt surreal. But as incredible as it was, I never could have imagined that this success, this moment I had worked my whole life for, would turn into the mess I'm in now. My name is Tony, I'm 29, and my life is nothing like it used to be. I grew up in a small town with my older brother, Derek, who's 33 now. We were close when we were kids, or at least I thought we were. Derek was always the bigger personality, the one who could charm a room and talk his way out of trouble. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more focused. I knew from a young age that if I wanted to make something of myself, I'd have to fight for it. Nobody was going to hand me anything. Derek and I had very different paths. While I was working part-time jobs to save for college, Derek was bouncing from one idea to another, always chasing some get-rich-quick scheme that never panned out. Our parents, Angela and Marcus, did their best to support both of us, but it wasn't easy. We were the kind of family that had to choose between fixing the car or paying the electric bill some months. I get why Derek struggled. I struggled too. But somewhere along the way, I decided I didn't want to live like that forever. I put myself through college with a mix of scholarships, part-time jobs, and student loans. I studied computer science and eventually launched my own tech startup. It wasn't glamorous in the beginning. I worked out of a cramped apartment, eating instant noodles and barely sleeping, but I believed in what I was building. Slowly, it started to pay off. The company grew. Investors took notice. And last year, I closed a deal that catapulted me into a completely different world. For the first time in my life, I felt secure. I paid off my student loans, bought a house, and even surprised my parents by paying off their mortgage. It felt incredible to finally give back after everything they'd done for me. I thought that was enough, more than enough, to show my family I cared. But Derek? He had other ideas. Derek reappeared in my life a few months ago after years of keeping his distance. At first, I was thrilled. He congratulated me on my success, said he was proud of me, and even joked about how I'd made it. It felt good to reconnect. But the conversation shifted quickly. He started dropping hints about how families should always stick together, how success should benefit everyone, not just one person. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured he was just being sentimental. I was wrong. Last week, Derek came over unannounced. He sat me down and laid out what he called a family plan. He said he wanted me to set aside $5 million. Yes, million. For the family. Specifically, for him. He claimed it wasn't just a request. It was a moral obligation. He said that since we grew up struggling together, my success wasn't just mine. It was ours. I didn't know whether to laugh or be angry. $5 million? For what? He started talking about some real estate venture he's been dreaming about, how it would change his life and set him up for the future. I told him I wasn't comfortable just handing over that kind of money. He didn't take it well. Derek accused me of being selfish, of forgetting where I came from. He said I'd let money change me and that I didn't understand what family was about anymore. He even brought up how he used to look out for me when we were kids, like that somehow meant I owed him a fortune now. The worst part? He sounded like he actually believed what he was saying. I ended the conversation as calmly as I could, but inside, I was fuming. Derek wasn't asking for help. He was demanding it. And he wasn't asking for a loan or even a gift. He was acting like he was entitled to my money, like it was his birthright. It was bizarre. And as much as I hated to admit it, it hurt. This was my brother. Someone I looked up to once. Now, it felt like he was using our shared history as a weapon. Things have only gotten worse since then. Derek started talking to our parents, Angela and Marcus, about it. My mom called me a few days ago, saying she'd been thinking about what Derek said. She didn't outright take his side, but she hinted that it's important to keep the family close and to support each other. My dad stayed quiet, which isn't unusual for him, but it stung. I've always been the one to step up for the family. I paid off their mortgage, sent them on a cruise last year, and never once asked for anything in return. Wasn't that enough? Apparently, not for Derek. To make matters worse, Derek has started showing up unannounced. He comes by, acting friendly at first, but then slipping in comments about how I'm turning my back on him and the family. He even said he's spoken to a lawyer about what he calls family rights. I don't even know if that's a real thing, but the fact that he'd go that far makes my blood boil. I talked to Sophie, my best friend since college, about it. She's always been my voice of reason, and she told me straight up that Derek is being manipulative. She said I need to set boundaries now before this gets even more out of hand. She's right, of course, but it's not that simple. He's my brother. No matter how wrong he is, the thought of cutting him off feels cruel. Then again, where does it end? If I give him the money now, will he come back in a year asking for more? Will my parents start to expect handouts too? I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, and one wrong move could shatter everything. The thing is, I don't want to lose my family, but I also don't want to let Derek walk all over me. I worked too damn hard to get here, and the thought of watching him gamble it away on some half-baked real estate scheme makes me sick. I don't know what to do. All I know is that this isn't over. Derek isn't the type to back down, and something tells me he's just getting started. Derek didn't back off. Not that I expected him to. In fact, he seemed more emboldened after my refusal to give him $5 million. He started calling me daily, leaving messages about how this is what families do and you're being unfair, Tony. When I didn't respond, he got creative. He started talking to people around me, our parents, his friends, even reaching out to some of my old acquaintances from our hometown. At first, I thought it was harmless, but it didn't take long for the guilt tripping to escalate. It started with Mom. She called me early one morning, her voice hesitant but firm. "Tony," she began, "I've been talking to Derek, and I think you two need to sit down and work this out. He's your brother, and he's struggling. You're in a position to help him now, and I just feel like, well, maybe it's the right thing to do." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Mom, I've done a lot for the family already. I paid off your mortgage, remember? And the cruise I sent you and Dad on last year? I'm not ignoring anyone, but Derek isn't asking for help. He's demanding millions. That's not reasonable," she sighed, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "I know, sweetheart, but Derek feels left behind. He's always been the one struggling to find his footing, and now that you've done so well, it's hard for him to see you succeed while he's still trying to figure things out." I clenched my jaw. "Mom, he's not figuring things out. He's coming after me like I owe him. That's not fair." Her tone softened, and I could tell she was trying to keep the peace. "Just think about it, Tony. Family is more important than money." I wanted to scream. I loved my mom, but she always had a way of making me feel like I was the bad guy, even when I wasn't. The call ended with her asking me to at least talk to Derek again, for her sake. Derek, of course, wasn't done either. A few days later, he showed up at my house uninvited. I had just gotten home from a meeting and barely had time to set my keys down before he was pounding on my front door. "Tony, open up, man. We need to talk," he shouted. Reluctantly, I let him in. He walked into my living room like he owned the place, looking around at the modern decor and expensive furniture with a smirk on his face. "Nice setup you've got here," he said, dropping onto my couch. "Bet this all cost a pretty penny." I crossed my arms, staying by the door. "What do you want, Derek?" He leaned back, putting his feet up on the coffee table like it was his own. "I've been thinking. I know $5 million might seem like a lot to you. To me," I interrupted, incredulous. "It is a lot. For anyone." He waved me off like I was being dramatic. Fine, I get it. Maybe we can work something out. How about $2 million? That's less than a tenth of what you're worth, Tony. You wouldn't even miss it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He talked about millions like they were pocket change. "Derek, this isn't a negotiation. I'm not giving you any money." His smirk disappeared, replaced by a dark, brooding expression I hadn't seen in years. "So that's it? You're just going to hoard all that money for yourself and leave your family behind? After everything we went through together?" I shook my head, trying to keep my temper in check. "You're twisting this. I've never left the family behind. But this? What you're asking for? It's not fair. He stood up, towering over me. You think this is just about me? This is about Mom and Dad, too. They could use some of that money to finally retire properly, you know? And what about you? You think all this success of yours just came out of nowhere? You think you'd be here without the family sacrifices we all made? I stared at him, my chest tight with frustration. What sacrifices, Derek? Because as far as I can tell, I'm the only one who's been making them. He scoffed, shaking his head. Unbelievable. You've let money change you. With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he'd just been. His words echoed in my head. You've let money change you, was that true? Had I become so focused on my own success that I'd forgotten about the people who mattered most? I pushed the thought away. This wasn't about me being selfish. This was about Derek trying to manipulate me. Still, the guilt lingered. The tension only grew over the next few weeks. Derek wasn't just talking to Mom anymore. He was bringing Dad into it too. Marcus wasn't the confrontational type, but even he started dropping subtle hints whenever I called to check in. You know, Dad said one evening, Derek's got some good ideas. He's just never had the chance to really go after them. Maybe if he had a little help. It was maddening. They weren't outright taking his side, but their words carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. They wanted me to help him, and they weren't going to let it go. The only person who seemed to understand was Sophie. When I told her about the latest confrontation, she didn't hold back. Tony, this isn't about family, she said, pacing across my kitchen. This is about Derek's ego. He sees your success, and instead of being happy for you, he's decided he's entitled to it. You can't let him guilt you into giving him what he wants. I know you're right, I said, slumping into a chair. But it's not just him anymore. It's Mom and Dad, too. They don't outright say it, but I can tell they think I should give him something. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression softening. You've already done so much for them, Tony. Paying off their mortgage, sending them on that trip. You've been more than generous. If they can't see that, that's on them, not you. I nodded, but the knot in my chest didn't go away. Sophie was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier. I felt like I was being pulled in two directions, and no matter which way I turned, someone was going to end up hurt. A few days later, Derek took things a step further. I was at work when I got a call from Chloe, a woman I'd been seeing for a few months. She was sweet, smart, and had been incredibly supportive through all of this. But today, her voice was tense. Tony, she said, I just had the weirdest conversation. Derek called me. I froze. He what? He called me, she repeated. Said he wanted to get to know the people in your life. But then he started asking all these personal questions about you, your work, your money. It was strange. I gripped the phone tighter, anger bubbling in my chest. I can't believe he's dragging you into this. I'm so sorry, Chloe. It's okay, she said quickly. But Tony, I think you need to be careful. He's not just asking for money anymore. He's trying to dig into your life. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Derek wasn't backing off. If anything, he was digging in deeper, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. By the time I got home that night, I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Derek's demands, my parents' quiet disappointment, Chloe's warning. It was all piling up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I could handle it on my own. I stood in my living room, staring out at the city skyline, and asked myself the same question I'd been asking for weeks. What do I do now? I didn't have an answer, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be good. The days following Chloe's warning were filled with unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek wasn't just being a persistent pain. He was scheming. And the worst part? He was starting to pull others into his orbit. I found out exactly how far he was willing to go when I got a call from my mom later that week. Her voice was unusually sharp, almost scolding. Tony, you need to stop shutting Derek out, she said, skipping any pleasantries. He's been trying to talk to you, and you're just ignoring him. I sighed, pressing a hand to my forehead. Mom, I've tried talking to him. Every time I do, he demands money. What am I supposed to say? Well, she said, her tone turning icy, Maybe you should consider it. Derek's right. This family made sacrifices so you could succeed. He just wants to get his life on track. Don't you think you should help him? Mom, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. I paid off your house. I've given back to this family in more ways than I can count. This isn't about me being selfish. Derek wants $5 million, or $2 million, or whatever he's decided now, and it's not reasonable. Her silence spoke volumes. Then she muttered, "You're acting like you're above all of us now." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd always been close to my mom, always wanted to make her proud. Hearing her say those words felt like a betrayal. Before I could respond, she added, Derek's been talking to Greg. He thinks you're just being stubborn. Who's Greg? I asked, although the sinking feeling in my chest told me I already knew. Greg's a lawyer, she said. Derek reached out to him for advice. He thinks there might be legal options to make sure the family gets what it's owed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own brother was consulting a lawyer about taking my money I had earned on my own. My voice rose despite my best efforts. Mom, this is insane. There's no legal basis for Derek to take anything from me. And why are you even entertaining this? Don't you see what he's doing? I see a brother who's struggling, she shot back. You should talk to Greg, at least hear what he has to say. It might help you see things from Derek's perspective. The call ended with her urging me, once again, to keep the family together, but all I could feel was anger and disbelief. Derek wasn't just manipulating me. He was manipulating everyone around me. I needed to clear my head, so I called Sophie and invited her over. She showed up within the hour, armed with a bottle of wine and her usual no-nonsense attitude. Let me get this straight, she said after I filled her in. Your brother, who has done nothing to earn his own money, is now working with a lawyer to try and claim a chunk of yours? And your mom is, what? Encouraging it? Pretty much, I muttered, pouring us both a glass of wine. She doesn't outright say she's on his side, but it's obvious she's trying to push me into giving him what he wants. Sophie took a sip of her wine, her expression hardening. Tony, this isn't just Derek being greedy anymore. This is calculated. He's trying to back you into a corner, and he's using your parents to do it. I know, I said, leaning back on the couch. But what am I supposed to do? If I push back, I risk alienating my whole family. If I give in, I'm basically signing over everything I've worked for. Then you need to draw a line, Sophie said firmly. You've already given so much to your family. If they can't see that, that's on them, not you. Her words were comforting, but the problem was still far from solved. I could feel the walls closing in, and I didn't know how to stop it. A week later, Derek's plan became even clearer. I got an email from Greg, the lawyer my mom had mentioned. He introduced himself as representing the interests of the family and requested a meeting to discuss financial obligations. Obligations. The word made my blood boil. I didn't respond, but the email was enough to confirm what I already suspected. Derek wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. As if that wasn't enough, Chloe called me that evening, her voice urgent. Tony, I found something you need to see, she said. What is it? I asked, already dreading her answer. Derek's been posting online, she said. I don't know if you've seen it, but he's been talking about you, about your money, and it's bad. She sent me a link, and my stomach dropped as I read the posts. Derek had been painting me as a selfish, entitled millionaire who refused to help his struggling family. The comments were filled with strangers calling me a monster, saying I'd forgotten my roots, accusing me of being heartless. It was like reading a hate campaign against myself, and it was all coming from my own brother. I felt sick. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. Derek was trying to ruin my reputation, to publicly shame me into giving him what he wanted. I spent the next few days trying to figure out my next move. Sophie and Chloe both urged me to consult a lawyer of my own, but the idea felt so surreal. Was this really my life now? Fighting my own brother in a legal battle over money? But I knew they were right. If Derek was willing to drag this into court, or at least threaten to, I needed to be prepared. I reached out to a lawyer named Paul, an old friend of Sophie's who specialized in family disputes. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, his face unreadable. Tony, he said when I finished, This is more common than you'd think. When money's involved, family dynamics can get ugly fast. But let me be clear, Derek doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. He can threaten all he wants, but he can't force you to give him anything. That was a relief, but Paul wasn't finished. That said, this isn't just about legalities. Your brother's already trying to ruin your reputation, and if he keeps this up, it could hurt you professionally. You need to be proactive. What do you mean? I asked. I mean you need to protect yourself. Keep records of everything. Texts, emails, even those online posts. And if Derek keeps escalating, we'll hit back hard. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I knew he was right. Derek wasn't going to stop, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. That night, I sat in my office, going through old messages from Derek, trying to piece together the timeline of his demands. As I worked, one thought kept running through my mind. How did it come to this? Derek and I were supposed to be brothers. We were supposed to look out for each other. But now, he felt more like an enemy than family. And the worst part? I didn't see any way to fix it. The storm brewing between Derek and me escalated faster than I could have imagined. Every time I thought he'd reached his limit, he'd find a new way to drag me deeper into his web. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about control, power, and, I think, revenge for my success. I should have known it was coming when Chloe called me again, her voice tinged with urgency. "Tony, there's something you need to see," she said. "What is it this time?" I asked, already exhausted from dealing with Derek's antics. "It's about Derek. He's been talking to someone named Madeline. Does that name mean anything to you?" My stomach dropped. Madeline was a rival of mine, someone I'd crossed paths with during the rise of my tech company. She was ruthless, always looking for ways to undermine her competitors. If Derek was working with her, it meant he was taking this feud to a whole new level. "What did you find?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Madeline posted something on LinkedIn about looking forward to new opportunities with a family connection, and then I saw her tagged in a photo with Derek at some networking event last week. "Tony, I think he's feeding her information about your company." My heart pounded as I processed her words. Derek had gone from being a nuisance to actively trying to sabotage me. And with someone like Madeline involved, the stakes were higher than ever. I immediately called Sophie, who came over within the hour. We sat in my living room, sifting through everything I knew about Derek's recent activities. His social media posts, the lawyer's emails, and now this connection to Madeline. It was all adding up to something much bigger than a family squabble. "This isn't just about the money anymore," Sophie said, her voice low. "Derek is trying to take you down. He knows he can't get what he wants legally, so he's going after your reputation and your business." "What do I do?" I asked, feeling more trapped than ever. "You fight back," she said firmly. "Derek wants to play dirty? Then you need to be smarter. Gather every piece of evidence you can, and make sure you're ready to defend yourself if this gets worse." The breaking point came a few days later. I was in the middle of a meeting at work when my assistant rushed in, her face pale. "Tony, we've got a situation," she said, handing me a stack of papers. "This just got delivered." I flipped through the documents, my heart sinking with every page. Derek had filed a formal complaint against me with the state, claiming I had used family resources to build my company. It was a baseless accusation, but the fact that he'd taken it this far was horrifying. Worse, the complaint was public, meaning anyone, including investors, could see it. I canceled the rest of my day and called Paul, my lawyer. He reviewed the complaint and shook his head. "This is absurd," he said. "Derek has no proof, and even if he did, the law doesn't support what he's claiming." "But that's not the point, is it? He's trying to make your life hell." Paul was right. Derek wasn't trying to win a legal battle. He was trying to bury me under the weight of constant attacks. And with Madeline in the mix, it felt like he was coming at me from every angle. That night, Chloe came over to help me unwind, but even her calming presence couldn't distract me from the chaos. We sat on the couch, her hand resting on mine as I vented about everything that had happened. "I just don't understand why he's doing this," I said, my voice breaking. "We're supposed to be brothers. Why can't he just be happy for me?" "Because it's not about happiness for him," she said gently. "It's about jealousy. Derek sees your success as a reminder of his failures, and instead of dealing with that, he's decided to take it out on you. Her words made sense, but they didn't make the situation any easier. I felt like I was losing not just my brother, but my entire family. My mom and dad were still on Derek's side, insisting that I find a way to work things out. They didn't understand that Derek wasn't interested in working things out. He wanted to destroy me. The final straw came when Paul called me 2 days later with news I never expected. "Tony, I've been digging into Derek's financials," he said. "I don't normally do this, but given everything that's happened, I thought it was worth a look. And I found something you need to know." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "Derek's broke," Paul said bluntly. "I don't just mean he's struggling. I mean he's in deep debt. Credit cards, unpaid loans, even a few lawsuits from failed business ventures. And here's the kicker. He's been using your name to secure those loans." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, using my name?" "I mean he's been telling lenders that you're backing him financially. He's forged documents with your signature and claimed you're his guarantor. If this comes to light, it could ruin your credit and your reputation." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Derek wasn't just trying to take my money. He was actively stealing from me. And if I didn't act fast, he could take everything I'd worked for. The next few days were a blur of meetings with Paul, Sophie, and Chloe as we put together a plan to expose Derek's lies. Paul filed a counter-complaint against Derek, outlining his forgery and fraud. At the same time, Sophie and Chloe helped me compile evidence of Derek's schemes, from his online posts to his connections with Madeline. It wasn't easy. Every step of the way, I felt a pang of guilt, wondering if I was going too far. But then I'd remember the look on Derek's face the last time we spoke, the smug satisfaction of someone who thought he'd already won. And I knew I couldn't back down. The breaking point came when Derek showed up at my office, uninvited and unannounced. He stormed into the lobby, demanding to see me. Security tried to escort him out, but he refused to leave until I came down. When I finally faced him, his expression was a mix of anger and desperation. "You think you're better than me?" he spat. "You think you can just cut me out of your life and get away with it?" "Derek, this isn't about cutting you out," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is about protecting myself from someone who's trying to destroy me." "Destroy you?" he laughed bitterly. "I'm your brother, Tony. Everything I've done has been for the family. You're the one who turned your back on us." I shook my head, feeling more tired than angry. "This isn't about the family, Derek. This is about you. And it ends now." He glared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. But as I watched him leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. The confrontation at my office left me shaken, but it also gave me a sense of clarity. Derek had made his position clear. He wasn't going to stop until he either got what he wanted or took me down in the process. But I wasn't the scared, quiet kid I used to be. If Derek wanted a fight, I was ready to defend everything I'd built. The next few days were a whirlwind. Paul worked tirelessly on the legal front, gathering evidence to counter Derek's claims and expose the fraudulent loans he'd taken out using my name. Sophie helped me draft a statement in case Derek's smear campaign escalated in the press, and Chloe stayed by my side, her unwavering support keeping me grounded. The real breakthrough came when Sophie stumbled upon something that changed everything. She'd been combing through Derek's social media activity when she found an old post from one of his friends, Ryan, a guy we both knew from our hometown. In the post, Ryan bragged about a great opportunity Derek had given him, complete with photos of them together at a bar, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. Sophie flagged it immediately. "Tony, look at this. I think Ryan might know more about Derek's schemes than he's letting on." I reached out to Ryan the same day, offering to meet him for coffee. He seemed hesitant at first, but the mention of Derek's name got him talking. As we sat in a quiet corner of the cafe, he admitted to something I hadn't expected. "Derek's been using your name for years," Ryan said, avoiding my gaze. "He told me you were backing him on some of his business deals. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now..." Well, it sounds like that wasn't true. My stomach churned as Ryan explained how Derek had used my name to secure partnerships, loans, and even investors for his failed ventures. It wasn't just the forgery Paul had uncovered. Derek had built an entire web of lies around me. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ryan sighed. Because I'm tired of being dragged into Derek's messes. And honestly, I don't want to be next on his list. I thanked him for his honesty and left the cafe feeling a mix of anger and relief. Derek's schemes were finally starting to unravel, and now I had the evidence to prove it. Armed with Ryan's testimony, Paul moved quickly. He filed a formal complaint against Derek, outlining the fraud, forgery, and misuse of my name. We also alerted the banks and lenders involved, ensuring they knew Derek had been acting without my consent. It wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about stopping Derek from dragging anyone else down with him. Meanwhile, Sophie and Chloe helped me craft a press statement, just in case Derek's smear campaign escalated. The statement was simple but firm. I acknowledged the tension within my family while making it clear that I wouldn't tolerate attempts to undermine my character or my business. I expected backlash, but what happened next took me completely by surprise. When the news of Derek's fraudulent activities broke, it wasn't just the banks and investors who took notice. My parents, Angela and Marcus, called me the same evening, their voices a mix of shock and confusion. Tony, my mom said, her tone hesitant, we've been hearing some things about Derek. Is it true? I hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell them everything. The forged documents, the fake loans, the lies he'd been spreading about me. It all came pouring out. By the time I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, my dad spoke. I can't believe he would do this, he said quietly. To you, to the family. I had no idea. Neither did my mom, apparently. For all their earlier attempts to defend Derek, the reality of his actions had left them stunned. They apologized for not believing me sooner, but the damage had already been done. I told them I wasn't holding a grudge, but I made it clear. I was done trying to fix things with Derek. The last time I saw Derek, it wasn't in a courtroom or at a family gathering. It was at my house. He showed up unannounced again, but this time, I was ready for him. I met him at the door, blocking his path before he could step inside. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here, I said, my voice cold. He smirked, though it lacked the confidence it once had. Come on, Tony. We're family. We can work this out. No, Derek, I said firmly. We can't. I've spent weeks cleaning up the mess you've made. Mess you tried to blame on me. You lied. You forged documents, and you dragged my name through the mud. This isn't something you just work out. His smirk faltered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret. But then he shrugged, as if none of it mattered. Fine, do whatever you want. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've got no one left. I didn't respond. I simply closed the door and locked it behind him. As I stood there, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief, but above all, I felt free. In the weeks that followed, the legal battle against Derek wrapped up in my favor. The banks voided the fraudulent loans, and the damage to my credit and reputation was minimal. Madeline, realizing Derek was more liability than asset, quietly distanced herself from him. As for Derek, the last I heard, he was facing legal consequences for his actions, though I didn't bother to follow up. My parents eventually came around, though our relationship hasn't fully healed. They still struggle to reconcile the son they raised with the man Derek became, but I've decided to let them work through that on their own. I've done enough trying to hold this family together. Chloe and Sophie stayed by my side through it all, and I've come to realize just how lucky I am to have people in my life who truly care about me. For the first time in months, I feel like I can finally breathe again. As for Derek, I don't know if he'll ever admit to himself what he's done, let alone apologize. But I've made peace with that. I've learned that sometimes, walking away is the only way to protect yourself. Family may be important, but it doesn't give anyone the right to take advantage of you. This isn't the ending I wanted, but it's the one I needed. And now, I can finally move forward, free from guilt, free from manipulation, and free from Derek's shadow.